What happens when love disappears entirely? Imagine waking up one morning to discover that every person you've ever loved, your parents, your partner, your children, your closest friends, are now nothing more than strangers whose faces trigger no warmth, no recognition of shared history, no flutter of affection. They remember loving you, but you feel nothing. This is an amnesia. You remember every moment, every laugh, every embrace. You simply don't care anymore. This was the reality Dr. Sarah Chen discovered in her neuroscience lab on a frost-covered morning in Boston, and what she found would challenge everything we thought we knew about human connection, consciousness, and what it means to be truly alive. Part 1. The Discovery. Dr. Sarah Chen had spent 15 years studying the neurological basis of human attachment when she encountered patient zero, a 42-year-old architect named Marcus Webb, who walked into Massachusetts General Hospital complaining of what he called emotional blindness. Marcus hadn't suffered a stroke, head trauma, or any obvious neurological event. Yet over the course of 3 weeks, his capacity to feel love had systematically vanished like morning fog burning away in sunlight. I look at my wife, Jennifer, and I know intellectually that I've loved her for 18 years. Marcus explained during his initial evaluation, his voice eerily flat and measured. I can recall our wedding day in perfect detail. The way her hands trembled when she said her vows, the orchids in her bouquet, the terrible DJ who played Celebrate 3 times. I remember the birth of our daughters, Emma and Claire. I remember anniversaries, arguments we've had about money and in-laws, reconciliations where we stayed up all night talking. I remember everything. But when I see her now, it's like looking at my accountant or the person who delivers my mail. There's no warmth, no connection, nothing. Sarah initially suspected depression or depersonalization disorder, but Marcus exhibited none of the typical symptoms. He wasn't sad, anxious, or detached from reality. His appetite was normal and healthy. He slept well, perhaps better than he had in years. He functioned perfectly at work, even receiving praise for a recent project. He could still feel other emotions: frustration when stuck in traffic, satisfaction when completing a crossword puzzle, amusement at a clever joke. He simply couldn't access love anymore. Not romantic love, not parental love, not even the basic affection one might feel toward a childhood friend or beloved family pet. The brain scans revealed something unprecedented and deeply unsettling. Marcus's anterior cingulate cortex, the region associated with emotional bonding and social attachment, showed unusual activity patterns that Sarah had never encountered in her years of research. More specifically, the neurons responsible for releasing oxytocin and vasopressin, the so-called love hormones that facilitate bonding and attachment, had fundamentally altered their receptor sensitivity. His brain could no longer properly process the neurochemical signals that create attachment, connection, and the warm feeling of belonging that most people take for granted. What made Marcus's case extraordinary wasn't just the condition itself. It was that he represented the first documented case of something Sarah would come to call affective dissolution syndrome. Within 6 months, she had identified 47 similar cases across North America, Europe, and Australia. Within a year, that number had grown to over 3,000 documented individuals. Within 18 months, support groups were forming in major cities. Online forums were buzzing with shared experiences, and the medical community was scrambling to understand what was happening. Love, it seemed, could disappear entirely. And it was happening to more people than anyone had imagined possible. Part 2. The Cascade. Emily Rodriguez was a 36-year-old emergency room nurse in Toronto when the disconnection began. Unlike Marcus, whose transformation occurred over weeks with a gradual dimming of emotional response, Emily's happened overnight like a switch being flipped. She went to bed loving her 7-year-old son Miguel with the fierce, protective intensity that defines motherhood. The kind of love that would make her throw herself in front of a bus without hesitation. She woke up feeling nothing but a vague sense of responsibility toward the small person eating cereal at her kitchen table. The guilt was overwhelming at first, Emily told Sarah during a research interview conducted via video call, her face appearing on the screen with dark circles under her eyes. Miguel would hug me, and I'd feel his little arms around my waist, and intellectually, I knew this should devastate me with tenderness. Every parenting book, every movie, every piece of cultural programming told me I should feel something profound in that moment. But there was just absence, like someone had scooped out the part of me that knew how to love him and left everything else intact. Emily's case revealed another crucial dimension of affective dissolution syndrome, the retention of moral reasoning and ethical frameworks. Despite feeling no love for Miguel, Emily continued to care for him impeccably. She fed him nutritious meals, helped with homework patiently, drove him to soccer practice every Tuesday and Thursday, read to him before bed, and ensured his emotional needs were met with careful attention. Not because she felt compelled by affection, but because she intellectually understood her responsibility as a parent and as a moral being. It's like being an actor in my own life, Emily explained, choosing her words carefully. I know my lines. I know what a loving mother would do in any given situation, so I do those things. I make his favorite pancakes on Saturday mornings. I put little notes in his lunchbox. I ask about his day and listen to his rambling stories about playground dynamics. But I'm performing love rather than feeling it. It's exhausting in a way that genuine love never was, because there's no emotional reward. I don't get that warm feeling when he laughs at my jokes. I just note, clinically, that he's happy and that I've successfully executed another parenting task. This distinction proved crucial to understanding what happens when love disappears entirely. The absence of love didn't eliminate ethical behavior, compassion based on principle, or basic human decency. It simply removed the emotional reward system that typically motivates such behavior. People with affective dissolution syndrome became, in essence, ethical automatons, doing the right thing because it was right, not because it felt good or because emotional bonds compelled them. Relationships, predictably, suffered enormously under this strain. Divorce rates among affected individuals approached 90% within the first year of onset. Not because the affected partners wanted to leave. Many, like Marcus, intellectually recognized that their marriages had value, history, and practical benefits, but because the unaffected partners couldn't endure the emotional void. Humans need to feel loved, not merely to be treated as though they're loved. The difference between genuine affection and competent performance of affection, it turned out, was impossible to ignore long-term. She does everything right. Marcus's wife Jennifer told Sarah during a couples counseling session arranged as part of the research protocol. She asks about my day with genuine curiosity. She holds my hand when we watch TV. She initiates sex regularly and seems to enjoy it physically. She remembers my coffee order and brings me flowers on Fridays. But I can see it in her eyes. There's a checklist running behind them. I'm a task on her to-do list. Maintain marriage, check. Make wife feel valued, check. I can't live like that. I need to be loved, not managed. Part 3, the investigation. As cases proliferated across continents with alarming speed, Sarah assembled a multidisciplinary research team to investigate potential causes. The theories range from environmental toxins in the water supply to novel viral infections affecting brain chemistry to collective psychological trauma from years of pandemic isolation and digital disconnection. Some researchers suggested it might be an evolutionary response to overpopulation, a biological mechanism to reduce reproduction and social bonding in an overcrowded world. Others proposed it was a side effect of modern technology, that constant digital connection, social media interactions, and parasocial relationships had somehow rewired our capacity for genuine attachment at the neurological level. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a chronobiologist studying circadian rhythms and sleep patterns in Melbourne. Yuki noticed that 73% of affective dissolution syndrome cases had one striking commonality. They had all experienced significant sleep disruption in the 6 months prior to onset. Not typical insomnia or occasional restless nights, but specifically disrupted REM sleep. The phase associated with emotional processing, memory consolidation, and the integration of daily experiences into coherent narrative. Sarah's team conducted a comprehensive study of 100 affected individuals and discovered a striking pattern that held across demographics. Nearly all of them had experienced prolonged periods of fragmented REM sleep caused by various factors. New parents dealing with crying infants and multiple nighttime wakings. Shift workers with irregular schedules that prevented proper circadian rhythm establishment. Individuals with undiagnosed sleep apnea. People taking certain medications that suppressed REM cycles as a side effect. And even some who had experienced extended periods of high stress that prevented deep sleep. The hypothesis that emerged was both elegant and terrifying. Love requires maintenance at the neurological level, and that maintenance occurs primarily during REM sleep. Just as the brain consolidates factual memories during sleep, moving them from short-term to long-term storage, it also reinforces emotional bonds through a process of neural pathway strengthening. When REM sleep is consistently disrupted over extended periods, typically 6 months or more, the neural pathways associated with attachment begin to atrophy like in used muscles. Eventually, they fail entirely, and the capacity for emotional bonding disappears. Think of it like a garden, Sarah explained during a presentation at the American Psychiatric Association's annual conference in San Francisco, using slides to illustrate the neural mechanisms. Relationships are the flowers, the visible, beautiful part that we experience consciously. But the roots, the actual neural connections that allow us to feel love, need constant nourishment. REM sleep is water. Deprive the roots long enough, and the flowers wilt permanently. The plant remembers being a flower, but it can't bloom anymore. The discovery was revolutionary and immediately sparked international interest, but also raised a disturbing question that kept Sarah awake at night. In a world of increasing sleep deprivation, irregular work schedules, REM-suppressing medications, and constant stress that prevented deep sleep, were we unknowingly engineering an epidemic of lovelessness? Were modern life conditions systematically destroying humanity's capacity for emotional connection? Part 4. The Adaptation. 18 months after Marcus's initial diagnosis, Sarah conducted extensive follow-up interviews with 50 individuals living with affective dissolution syndrome, trying to understand how they were adapting to their new reality. What she found challenged her assumptions about the necessity of emotional love for human flourishing and satisfaction. Take Nathan Park, a 49-year-old high school teacher from Auckland who lost his capacity for love 3 years earlier after a prolonged period of stress-induced insomnia. Nathan had been married for 22 years with 3 teenage children when the disconnection occurred. His wife Linda chose to stay with him despite his emotional absence, because she believed in their commitment and their shared history. I won't pretend it's easy or that I don't grieve what we lost, Linda told Sarah during a joint interview in their comfortable home. Some mornings I wake up angry that I'm married to someone who can't love me back the way I love him. I look at photos from our early years together, and I can see in his eyes something that isn't there anymore. But Nathan has never been more reliable, more thoughtful, or more intentionally kind than he is now. He asks me every week what would make me happy, and then he does those things without complaint. He's present in ways he never was before. Is it the same as feeling loved? No, but maybe it's something equally valuable, being with someone who chooses you deliberately every single day, not just because biochemistry compels them to. Nathan's perspective was equally illuminating and philosophically profound. Before this happened, I loved Linda deeply, but I also took her for granted in 1,000 small ways. Love created a complacency, an assumption that she'd always be there because we felt connected. I'd forget anniversaries, ignore her when I was absorbed in work, make plans without consulting her. Now, I have to actively choose her every single day. I have to think carefully about her needs, her happiness, her fulfillment, because there's no emotional autopilot anymore. I can't coast on feeling connected. In a strange way, I'm a better husband now than I was before, even though I can't feel what I once felt. This pattern repeated across multiple cases with remarkable consistency. People with affective dissolution syndrome often became more attentive partners, more conscientious parents, and more reliable friends. Not because they felt emotional bonds, but because they understood intellectually what relationships required and chose deliberately to provide it. The performance of love, paradoxically, sometimes exceeded the actions of those who felt love but acted carelessly. The syndrome also revealed something profound about different types and layers of love. While affected individuals lost romantic and familial attachment, that warm, visceral feeling of connection, many retained what psychologists call companionate love, the satisfaction that comes from shared activities, mutual respect, aligned goals, and compatible daily life. They couldn't feel the emotional rush of connection, but they could still appreciate partnership, collaboration, and companionship. Margaret O'Connor, a 68-year-old retired teacher from Dublin, described it beautifully during her interview. I look at my husband Patrick, and I don't feel that swooping sensation in my chest anymore when he walks into a room. But when we work together in the garden on Sunday afternoons, or when he makes me laugh with his terrible puns about vegetables, there's a contentment. It's not passion, but it's not nothing either. It's choosing each other deliberately, moment by moment, and finding satisfaction in that choice. Maybe that's what love becomes anyway after 50 years of marriage. Less feeling, more choosing. Part 5, the implications. As understanding of affective dissolution syndrome grew and spread through medical communities worldwide, it sparked intense philosophical and ethical debates that extended far beyond neuroscience laboratories. If love could disappear without eliminating ethical behavior or relationship commitment, what did that say about the nature of love itself? Was it as essential to human life as we'd always believed? Some philosophers and researchers argued that the syndrome revealed love to be nothing more than neurochemical manipulation, a biological trick evolution used to ensure reproduction and child-rearing in a species with unusually long developmental periods. If people could maintain relationships, fulfill responsibilities, and even find contentment without it, perhaps love was less essential to human flourishing than centuries of poetry, literature, and cultural mythology had led us to believe. Perhaps we'd romanticized what was essentially a mechanism, mistaking the means for the end. Others contended that the syndrome proved the opposite, that the visible struggle of affected individuals and their partners demonstrated how crucial emotional connection was to genuine human thriving. People could survive without love, certainly. They could be ethical, responsible, and even find moments of satisfaction. But they couldn't truly flourish in the deepest sense. They lost access to experiences that made life worth living, transcendent moments of connection that felt like evidence of meaning in an uncertain universe. The syndrome also raised troubling questions about treatment and medical ethics. Within 2 years of the initial discovery, Sarah's team had developed a potential intervention, a combination of intensive REM sleep therapy conducted over several months and targeted neurochemical treatment that could sometimes restore love's neural pathways. The therapy was demanding, expensive, and time-consuming, requiring patients to spend several weeks in sleep clinics while their REM cycles were carefully monitored and optimized. Early trials showed promise, with approximately 40% of patients experiencing partial or full recovery of emotional bonding capacity after 6 months of treatment. But not everyone wanted treatment, which raised difficult questions about autonomy and the definition of illness. Marcus Webb, the original patient who had started Sarah's entire journey, declined the experimental therapy when offered a place in the clinical trial. "I've built a life that works," he explained during a follow-up consultation. "My relationship with Jennifer ended, and that was painful for both of us. But I found fulfillment in my work, my friendships, and my personal growth in ways I never did when I was governed by emotion. Love was chaotic. It made me jealous, possessive, and irrational. I made decisions based on feelings rather than logic. Now I choose my behaviors consciously based on ethical principles. I'm not sure I want to go back to being controlled by neurochemicals I can't regulate." His perspective was shared by nearly 30% of individuals with the syndrome who were surveyed. They had adapted to lovelessness and found unexpected advantages: reduced anxiety about relationships, freedom from jealousy and possessiveness, clarity of thought unclouded by emotional attachment, ability to make decisions based purely on rational evaluation. They had become, in essence, willing Stoics, people who chose duty, reason, and ethical commitment over emotional experience. Some even argued that they'd achieved a kind of enlightenment, freeing themselves from attachment in ways that Buddhist practitioners spent lifetimes pursuing. Part 6. The Question. 3 years after the first documented case, Sarah Chen sat in her office late one evening, reviewing the comprehensive data her team had collected from over 5,000 affected individuals worldwide. Affective Dissolution Syndrome remained relatively rare, affecting perhaps 1 in every 20,000 people, but its implications resonated far beyond those directly impacted. It had become a mirror reflecting back fundamental questions about human nature. The syndrome had revealed that love, while powerful and deeply meaningful, wasn't strictly necessary for ethical behavior, relationship maintenance, or even a form of contentment. It had demonstrated that humans were capable of choosing connection deliberately rather than falling into it helplessly through neurochemical compulsion. It had shown that duty, commitment, and conscious choice could substitute for emotional attachment in maintaining the social bonds that make civilization possible. But it had also revealed what was lost, and the loss was profound. The affected individuals consistently reported a flattening of experience, a grayness to life that no amount of conscious choice could fully compensate for. They retained ethics, but lost enchantment. They could analyze beauty, but not feel transported by it. They could recognize that their children were important, but couldn't feel their hearts expand at the sight of them sleeping. They lost access to joy's intensity, to the transcendent moments when connection felt like proof of meaning in an uncertain universe. Sarah thought of her own daughter Sophie, now 6 years old, asleep in the apartment directly above her office. She imagined looking at Sophie and feeling nothing, remembering every moment of her childhood, but experiencing no warmth, no protective fierceness, no flood of tenderness that made her willing to sacrifice anything. The thought was more horrifying than any nightmare she'd ever experienced. Yet she also thought of Marcus, Nathan, and Margaret, people who had lost love entirely and still found ways to live meaningfully, ethically, and even contentedly. They had discovered that human beings were resilient enough to build lives on reason and choice when emotion failed them. They proved that consciousness could substitute for feeling, that deliberate action could replace instinctive care. The final question, Sarah realized as she closed her laptop and prepared to head upstairs, wasn't whether people could survive without love. Clearly they could, and some even preferred it. The question was what kind of world we wanted to build and what we believed made life worth living. One where love was protected, nurtured, and prioritized even when its absence might not destroy us. Or one where we accepted lovelessness as simply another variation of human experience, neither better nor worse than emotional connection, just different. As Sarah turned off her office lights and climbed the stairs, she knew the answer in her bones with absolute certainty. She reached Sophie's room and looked down at her sleeping daughter, feeling the familiar swell of love in her chest. Irrational, overwhelming, and utterly necessary. Sophie's face in sleep, peaceful and trusting, triggered that cascade of neurochemicals that Sarah could name and explain but would never want to lose. Tomorrow, she would continue her research into protecting and restoring humanity's capacity for connection. She would work on identifying early warning signs of REM sleep disruption. She would advocate for workplace policies that protected sleep health. She would push for better screening and treatment options. Because survival wasn't enough. Humans needed enchantment. They needed the irrational, the overwhelming, the transcendent. They needed love, even if technically they could live without it.